Hi everybody and welcome back. My name's Alison, the online piano and the online violin tutor. Today is another special video. It's kind of part two if you want. This is my friend Leanne Miller. She is a qualified hand therapist and she works privately as well for the NHS. Over to you.
Okay, so I get a lot of patients who come through the department with a variety of different hand injuries. When we find out a bit more information about them and ask them about their work or their hobbies, and they tell me that they're a musician, either just pleasure or professionally, it really forms quite an important part of their treatment, because obviously musicians tend to be very dedicated, they spend a lot of time practicing, and if they're performing at a high level, obviously a lot of their time is committed to performing and practicing. So I'm just going to go through a couple of conditions, things to think about if you've had a hand injury, and some top tips really of how you can make sure you reduce the chances of having any complications after a hand injury. So whether you've had a fracture, a dislocation, even be it a minor sprain, sometimes very odd things can happen between connections of the hand and the brain. People think that if they've injured the hand, it is literally just their hand, but obviously all the signals are coming from the brain to the hand and back again. So sensory information, motor information, things about the coordination, the speed, the amount of pressure, and obviously that is all crucial things when you're playing an instrument like the violin. So even if you've had, you know, a very minor injury, you can have swelling, stiffness. If you've had surgery, you might have a scar that's very hypersensitive, and all these things can create, playing an instrument like the violin can be really problematic, and obviously that can put people off wanting to do it. It can make it quite painful, they can be achy after they've been playing and practicing. So whatever hand injury you've had, you may have been given a splint to wear. Now obviously, a disclaimer here, some conditions that you've had, such as extensor tendon injuries and flexor tendon injuries, if you've had a laceration of a tendon and it's been surgically repaired and you've been put into a splint, you must follow the guidelines of your therapist, because in these conditions, if you've had a complete 100% division, you will not be allowed to play your instrument for a certain period of time, because you may well rupture the tendon from the amount of force that you have to put through and the positions you have to get your hand and wrist into. So you must follow the advice that you're given. This is just a very basic overview, so it's really important that you don't you know, take everything that I'm saying as gospel, because everyone is very, very different and there are certain guidelines that you must follow. So if you've had a splint on, if you imagine that, even if you have a paper cut and you put a plaster on your finger, you will tend to find that you leave that finger out, you know, even if you're brushing your teeth or, you know, doing something in the kitchen. And very, very quickly, by neglecting that finger, the area in the brain that is dedicated to that hand and to that finger can start to shrink, because if you're not using it, it's almost like use it or lose it, basically. So if you think that's in a very minor paper cut kind of thing, where if you've had a fracture, a dislocation, a ligament injury, so a very potentially painful condition, and you've had a splint on, obviously you can't see the finger, you can't get the sensory feedback, and so things can start to change quite rapidly. And obviously you might not be able to play the instrument for a while, but some really, really good tips are, and it sounds quite bizarre, but these really do work, and research has been done about this. If you imagine playing the instrument, so playing a particular piece, or just popping the fingers in different positions, and even just imagine doing your bow technique, research has suggested that when you think about doing an activity, it doesn't just have to be about a musical instrument, it can be any activity. The areas of the brain, the same areas that are used when you actually do the activity, are stimulated when you even think about it. So they did research in athletes. So an athlete will imagine doing, say, the 100 meters sprint before they actually do it, because it's activating those muscles and sending signals to those muscles that will be used. So it's really, really good if you have a period of time where you can't play, that you do some imagined movements, we call it. Okay, so that's just one thing. Other things that you might want to think about are how your timetable of playing, okay? When you've had a hand injury, you will not be able to go back to playing for hours and hours and hours, because you'll tend to go in a vicious circle. You'll increase the swelling, you'll have more pain, you'll become stiffer, and then you'll carry on going through this if you keep going. So you have to be aware that for a certain period of time you may have to reduce the amount of hours or frequency in which you practice during the day. You may have to take more regular breaks, you may have to use things like compression on the finger to reduce swelling, you may have to use things like ice, okay? These are all things that you should be advised to do by your hand therapist if you see one, or a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist. But it's just quite useful if you just had a minor sprain and you think, oh gosh, I just can't get quite back into it, that this is all could be useful information for you. Right, quite an interesting condition that is purely related to musicians now. It's called Musicians Focal Dystonia. Obviously musician relating to the activity, focal meaning a specific part of the body, and dystonia means uncoordinated movements, so awkward movements. Now if you imagine musicians need to have fluid, relaxed movements to get a good quality of sound. So if we look at the violin, obviously when you've seen Alison play the violin, everything is nice and fluid. She needs to have nice gentle movements. It's not rigid, and it's not harsh, and it's not kind of stoppy and starty. Now in Musicians Focal Dystonia, for some reason, now the actual cause has not been properly identified yet. There could be multiple reasons why this happens. The signals between the brain and the hand become slower, disorganised, jumbled up, and obviously what Alison's brain is telling her to do is now not coming out in what she actually needs to do with her hand. And you tend to find that when it's a violinist, it's normally the hand that they use on the strings. And instead of the nice fluid movement, moving up and down the positions and moving the fingers onto different strings, you get a very awkward, uncoordinated, odd-looking hand. So it almost goes into a spasm. And Alison can be telling her fingers to go on a certain string and to put a certain amount of pressure on, but somewhere along the line, the signals aren't getting there. This can be very, very frustrating for a musician. Because obviously, it can really affect the quality of your play, and ultimately, if you're playing at a high level, this can affect your career basically. So there's a really useful website, the BAPM website. So BAPM stands for British Association of Performing Arts and Medicine, and there'll be a link that you can find out more about the treatment and more information on Musicians Focal Dystonia. And just let me say, this is not purely something that happens in the violin. It can happen in trumpet players. Their mouth can get focal dystonia, in the fact that just like the hand, you get very uncoordinated movements. So there's loads of resources on this website, and an occupational therapist, one of my colleagues, a hand therapist called Catherine Butler, has done a lot of research into the treatment of this. Treatment of musicians' focal dystonia can take a long time, so a musician needs to be aware that they will have to put a lot of effort into their rehabilitation. And there's all sorts of weird and wonderful techniques that you might think, why on earth am I doing this? But basically, any treatment is trying to remap the signals that are going from the brain to the hand or to the mouth, or whichever area of the body that you're using to play this instrument. But this can take a long time. The effects of the uncoordination can happen quite rapidly, whereas the reversing that can take a long, long time. Techniques such as putting a glove onto the fingers that are affected, so you're more aware of what's happening to those fingers, can be used. Even things like changing the position that you're playing an instrument. So say it was the violin that a person's got musicians focal dystonia in. Obviously you normally play standing up. Sometimes playing the violin lying down, I know it sounds bizarre, but it basically makes you more aware of what you're doing, because I think musicians take things for granted. When you're very, very good, things come very easily, automatic. You're going to autopilot when you play. And obviously what we're trying to do is break everything back down into kind of each segment of how you play an instrument. So by almost taking you out of your comfort zone and putting you in a position that you would never play an instrument in, lying down, why would you play the violin lying down? It makes the brain start to think about each piece that makes up how you play. So there's loads of different treatments that you can do, but this is just a very quick basic whistle-stop tour of Musicians Focal Dystonia. So the BAPM website is a really useful guide. It's got things that you can print out, and not many musical teachers or musicians might be aware of this because it is very, very rare. But there's loads of things that you can do if you think a student, or if you think you might be getting this, and it's all about how you practice, the time in which you dedicate to this. So it is a bit of a shift in thinking, really. But there are lots of techniques that can be done. So do look on that website. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. This literally could go on for hours because it is such a complicated syndrome. But this is really just a basic, brief overview to make you more aware in case this condition comes up in conversation. You think, oh, that's interesting, you want to know more about it, or if you think a student or yourself is showing any signs and symptoms. So I hope you enjoyed this video.
Thank you very much, Leanne. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment in the box underneath. Perhaps myself or Leanne can try and get back to you if we can. Please check out my other videos and don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.